And like your employees, of course, you know, it is you as a leader and as a chef must have a sense of humor. If you don't find, the worst part of your job funny, at least in retrospect, after a couple of beers, you don't belong in the restaurant business.
Welcome back to Turn and Burn. Today, Fred and I are talking to Brandon, who's based in Houston. He's a general manager, and he's going to give us a totally different perspective on the industry. We're excited to talk to him. Thank you so much for joining us, Brandon.
It's a pleasure.
Brandon, what's going on, man? Long time
What's
no
up?
see. How are you?
Yeah, good man. How you been?
I don't complain, man. Don't complain at all. So, Brandon, what we want to do, man, and again, appreciate you for taking time out of your busy day, man. I know the GM life and how hectic it can be, especially around this time of the year. But we definitely appreciate you spending time with us. But Brandon, talk to us about kind of your background as far as how you got in this industry. I know I can tell you from my standpoint, it was an accident, right?
Yeah,
It's not something I went to school for. I didn't plan for it. I had a totally different uh, you know, path in my life, I guess what I thought anyway, as far as what I was going to do. And I just kind of stumbled upon it, man, honestly. And, once I got in, I realized I was pretty good at it. And so I just kind of took it from there and the sky was the limit. But tell us kind of your path, Brandon, as far as how you got to become a GM, or was that even planned? I see you rocking your U of H hoodie. So was that something you went to school for? Restaurant,
yeah.
hotel management?
No, man. I was pre-law actually. I was gonna go to law school. I I actually so uh, I was the army paid for my college, right? I was just going to school, right? And I got a job on campus at U of H. And then, long story short, I moved in with these couple guys, and one guy was a bartender at a restaurant, and I was seeing these big wads of cash that he had. I was like, hey man, like I'm barely scraping by. You got all this free money, man. Like what's going on? What are you doing? You selling drugs or whatever? So he, he, he's like, no man, I'm a bartender. I work here, right? And I says, well, can you get me a job? I'd like some extra cash, and he's like, yeah man, come on. And so started waiting tables, moved up to bartender within 6 months. I've been approached to get into management. I said, no, man, I'm going to be a lawyer. I don't want to do that. And I got bored one day. I was bartending one day. I was like, man, I need a challenge. I'm bored. So I said, let's go to management. I walked to my GM, hey, let's go to management. So did, and like you said, man, fell in love with the business. Realized I was really good at it. Moved up really quickly. I think you and I, our careers kind of aligned with the time frame from which we started and to when we were moved to GM, and I'm still at it. Almost 20 years later. Law
How
school's still there, so
Yeah, of
if I ever.
course. Yeah, no, for sure, right? I mean, like you can do it at any point in your life, and in the
Yeah,
meantime, you have a little bit more stability to make that decision, right? I mean, that's
yeah,
that's kind of what I would assume being a GM would give you as opposed to being a server or a bartender. And that's I had actually had that question because I think a lot of people don't understand what a GM does. I think they think of like the pieces of flair guy from Office Space. They think of like, right, just like some guy who kind of,
yeah,
is the more of a maitre d' or comes over and asks you how your soup is. And, like, so if you could give us an idea just from an operation standpoint, I guess, but also like from a staffing standpoint and from a responsibility standpoint, like, especially because we should note that like you're in a more corporate environment, restaurant environment. So can you give us an idea of kind of what you do as a GM and how important you are to the organizational structure?
yeah. I mean, we're so our corporate structure, their culture, right? That you have. That's the foundation of everything, right? It's the culture of the company. You're the GM. You are the steward of the culture, right? So to speak, right? And that's first and foremost the most important thing, um, because without that, everything else kind of slides to the side. Um, and after that, it's your people, right? You got to staff. You have to stay staffed, and obviously, during COVID was pretty rough. Begging people to work for you instead of sitting home and getting paid. So staffing, training, developing, that's a huge piece, right? Developing your team, whether it be your busser, right? Making him better at his job, uh, all the way up to your number two, your second in command. You're constantly teaching and developing. Um, a good GM, in my opinion, isn't one that's uh, constantly in the fire, getting his hands dirty. He's sort of above it all, and he's moving pieces around, and he's teaching, he's developing, and he's standing on the culture to make his restaurant thrive.
Brandon, I'm glad you mentioned COVID, and I'd like you to touch a little bit more on that. Just the difference between, because I was in the game before COVID, and obviously being a consultant, I kind of see the struggles that are happening. I still tell people this to this day. You know, you are in charge of motivating every
Yeah,
single person that's under that building, right? And if you can't get those results from them, it's a struggle, man. And people would always ask me, what was the hardest thing that you would do, especially for the company we worked for with the volume we did. What was the hardest thing about your job? And for me, Brandon, it was never the daily operations as far as running busy shifts, like you mentioned, the hiring, the training, all
that's
that
fun.
stuff that you had to do. Right, that's the fun stuff. To me,
Yeah,
it was the motivation of everyone from, like you said, your management team on down to that busser or that hostess that you hired, that you're just trying to get the best out of them, man. And that was a challenge for me. But I can only imagine what it's like now. Like you say, people don't want to work, and then the ones that do, they want to charge $25 an hour just for a dishwashing position, man. You
yeah,
know?
yeah. It's crazy, man. So you know, always felt like I was in the driver's seat. You know,
Hmm.
because I was always ahead of staffing, right? Always ahead of staffing, always ahead of the game, right? And so I always felt like I was in the driver's seat when it came to that, and I was never held hostage by a team member, right? And during COVID, it's kind of the opposite, right? And because you had the incentive for someone to stay home, right? That's what it was. It's an incentive for you to stay home and not work. And so we're scrounging, right? And yeah, you're right. The wage became a premium, right? You're where I was paying a dishwasher $14 an hour, $15 an hour before. I was told, hey, if you have to pay a dishwasher $20 an hour, bring along. That's unheard of, especially I don't know about in New York, but in the Houston market, that's unheard of, right? Uh, uh, but and now we're sort of seeing uh, uh, a regression back to the almost a norm, right? If you're ahead of the game, right? So like my philosophy is I'm going to overstaff my roster and I'm going to pick the best pieces and give those guys the best shifts, the hours, right? And that creates sort of a competition between the staff, right? Who's going to be the best? You know what I mean? And it puts me back in the driver's seat.
One of the things that you and I talked about in your pre-interview a little bit, Brandon, too, was your management style. If you just want to talk about that for a second, because you said like, as opposed to leading like a tyrant, or, that you talked a lot about wanting people to kind of shine in their roles and being supportive and those sorts of things. You could talk a little bit about how you think that affects the way the team performs, but also the way that you can meet whatever your milestones and benchmarks are
Yeah,
for the company.
it's all about empowerment, right? So um, I don't want someone to come to me with a problem. I've got enough of those of my own, right? So I want somebody to come to me with a solution. Uh, so I empower my people to make decisions, and I tell them don't be afraid to fail, right? We're all going to fail. That's how we learn. That's how we get better. So um, you know, you are in charge of your department. I will give you everything you need. I'll help you. I'll sit down with you. I'll teach you. But at the end of the day, it's your department. It's your restaurant within a restaurant, right? If you want to look at it like that. So you are empowered to make decisions. Now, if you screw up, right, we're gonna have a come to Jesus meeting, right? So we're gonna fix it and make sure it doesn't happen again. But that's how you develop people, right? Like I want someone to take my job. I want my number two to be like, hey man, it's mine now, right? So because that's how I get better. That's how I move up. So I just I lead through, and not necessarily leadership by committee, but I let everyone take ownership of their department, and I just guide them. That's it. And to me that's fun, right? I don't want to do your job for you, but I enjoy making people better. That's what I do. So
I think that's the key, Brandon. It's when your child goes to the bathroom and wipes their butt for the first time, right? It's just a, it's like it's that overwhelming joy to see someone that you develop from, this when they came in and they were at this point in their management career, and then you watch them grow to the point where, like you said, they could possibly take your job. And it's not that they're taking it; it just it makes the overall team better if you have
Yeah.
someone that is as good as you are on your level. Just imagine how that trickles down, to the rest of the team. And so it does feel, it's a sense of empowerment, man. It makes you feel great about what you're doing.
I've I've trained about 5 GMs in my time. So and I like to think that I'm pretty good at it. So.
So going back to, the daily operation part, because I think people, like Sarah mentioned earlier, it's you don't really understand the hats that we wear. And again, I'm not in the game anymore, but I still understand wearing those hats. But what would be the top three things that you should do to be effective as a general manager on a daily basis?
I think I mentioned before, you got to stand on your culture, whatever that culture is, right? You have to be the steward of the culture, number one, right? And right up there with the tide, because it's really ingrained in the culture where I am now is people development, right? People. I always tell people I'm not in the restaurant business. I'm in the people business. I just happen to sell food, right? So, and so training, teaching, developing things like that. Um, uh, After that, kind of quality control, right? Making sure that everything that we do, every product that we sell is like 100% perfect. You know what I mean? Um, Market saturation is a real thing, right? And inflation is real. And so when people are dining out less, you have to make yourself the obvious choice amongst your competitors, and you do that by having the best, most trained, most talented people on your team, and then number two, the best product being sold, right? You do those two things well, you're gonna survive. Where a lot of restaurants fail, you're gonna survive. So those are probably the top three things I do every day. After that, obviously sanitation is a big deal. In order to survive, you've got to make money, you've got to be profitable, but the P&L is kind of last on the list because if you do everything right up to that point, your P&L is going to kind of take care of itself.
I'm curious about the difference between the corporate world of restaurants and kind of the scrappy, independent kitchens that I think a lot of people that we're going to end up talking to are coming out of. In sort of in a connected to that, how you are training people coming out of those scrappier, independent environments to fit into an employment situation where there are rules and standards that are for the brand and for the business that it's your job to enforce and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so some of the benefits of working for a corporate environment is a lot of mistakes that people have come before you've made, they've sort of been ironed out, and the system's been created to prevent you from making the same mistake again, right? That's like I mentioned before. People are going to make mistakes. That's how we learn. But that's where systems come from too, right? Is learning from those mistakes and putting something in place to prevent that from happening again. That's really great. The support structure, right? If something breaks, you just need to call someone, and within an hour, someone's there to fix it, right? That's amazing, right? A lot of people don't have that luxury, right? And then the larger you are as a corporate entity, the more buying power you have, so you have leverage over vendors, right? That that that's something you take for granted as well, right? You place an order and it's there, right? Right? You don't have to worry. Like, you're their priority, right? Because they don't want to lose that account. Um, um, some of the downsides of it, if you have an insecure leader in a corporate structure, right? It's it turns into like almost a gotcha kind of moment, right? We're gonna come in when you're not there. We're gonna uh, come in and sort of pick you apart and make you look bad instead of developing you, right? So if you have and I work for both types of leader in a corporate environment, right? So you've got someone who's vested in your development. They're going to come in and they're going to motivate you. They're going to teach you. You have someone who's maybe threatened by you or insecure. they're going to come in and berate you and be that tyrant and sort of tear you down, and kind of have a gotcha moment, versus, and like you said, I'm training people now from sort of an independent, one-offs or whatever, or startups, and when they come in, the thing that they have a hard time adjusting to is the structure, right? They have a hard time adjusting to, well, this is the way we're going to do things, because this is what works. This is what works for us, right? Um, um, the freedom that you have to do things your own way in a sort of a one-off is cool. It's liberating, and if you know if you know what you're doing, you're going to be successful. But when you have these junior level managers who work for a mom and pop shop, then they come in, they're used to doing it one way, and it doesn't work. You have to conform to the corporate structure. So.
Brandon, it's funny you said that because we had a checklist for a checklist. You know what I mean? So it was
Yeah.
it was no way that you would fail, right? And so the biggest thing for me when I started consulting with more one offs and smaller mom and pop chain type restaurants, man, was just there was no structure. There's no procedures. It's almost like you're building it from scratch, which,
Yeah.
again, you have to start somewhere. That's not the take home piece. But like you said, you take those things for granted when, you walk in and, the front door hasn't been clean, or, the floor hasn't been mopped and you're opening in 5 minutes. Right. And you're like, what's going on? Right. And so
Yeah.
I echo, everything that you mentioned, but on the flip side, you're right. You don't have that freedom because it's already laid out. You don't have any wiggle room. There's no, let me test the waters and see if this works. Well, no, it
Yeah.
doesn't, because we
Exactly.
already tried that. So no, you're 100% correct, and I definitely noticed that difference once I stepped into my own realm of working with restaurants. Brandon, I don't want to get us in any trouble. I don't know if we still can be. Is there statute of limitation on stories of stuff that you and I have done in the past, Brandon?
Well, I tell you what, Fred. There's nothing in there's going to get us trouble with our wives, so we're good there, right? So. Uh, No, man. So Fred and I, it's funny. We met. We both got into management around the same time with the company we were working for. Met at a leadership seminar, like a
Mhm.
leadership class that they put on, and as part of the development there, um, we just hit it off, and we really only worked together for about a year in the same
Mhm.
location, right? But our career paths sort of had the same trajectory. But um, I mean, we don't really have any crazy stories,
Be
between the
easy,
two of
Brandon.
us. I mean, GM retreats, stuff like that, but nothing real crazy.
What do you mean
Alcohol.
GM retreats, where they take you guys on vacation and like you basically do training seminars? Is that what that is?
Yeah, I mean, so they take all the GMs from our company, and we ran out of I don't know if you want to call it a resort. It was kind of a bottom tier golf course community that they would put us up in, and but there'd be a lot of alcohol involved all day, or all night rather. I remember we were one of the newer GMs came in, and flooded our bathroom. Remember that?
I do remember that.
Yeah, flooded our bathroom. I think he actually slept in the bathtub that night. To be honest with you, just a little too much to
uh,
drink. So uh,
I remember when so it was my probably first, I would say, 2 or 3 months working on the floor after I graduated, and I started managing, right. So I go through the training for it, she's 3 or 4 months that the company put us through. And so it was, of course, back then, once you get out of training, you're Mr. Night, whatever, your night kitchen manager
yeah,
or your night floor manager, right? It's just kind of the rules of managing. So I remember it was one of my shifts. It was probably a slower shift because they don't give a single solo shift to a newer manager. So it's just probably Monday, Tuesday, whatever. And so I'm working my shift, and I'm trying to earn my stripes, right? I'm trying to show the GM why he made the great choice of hiring me and bringing me on board. I'm snaking the carpet, and there was a family who flagged me down at a table, and they were like, "Hey, can you check on our dad? He went to the bathroom,
oh,
and he hasn't come back yet." I was like, sure, no, absolutely, no problem. So anyway, I go to the bathroom and, I walk in and I'm like, sir, are you here? And he's like, he's an older gentleman. He's like, yeah, son, I'm here. And I say, okay, I'm just checking on you. Your family's, they're kind of worried about you. And so I just stopped in to check on you and see if everything was okay. And he's like, well, Sonny, it's not really okay, but I'm here. And I said, was there anything I can help you with? And so in my mind, I'm thinking, maybe he had struggles getting up. He's an older gentleman, so maybe he just couldn't get up. And he's like, I had whatever I ate, it just didn't sit well with me. And poor guy, he had suspenders on. And so he's trying to make it to the bathroom and undo his suspenders while he's in the stall. And obviously he didn't make it, right? So in hindsight, at that moment, I realized probably right now what I probably should have done was went back out, got his family, closed off the bathroom, and had them go in and deal with it, right? That's probably what I should have did in hindsight. But I'm trying to earn my stripes. I'm trying to freaking get, kudos to Fred. He did a great job last night. I'm like, okay, sir, I'm going to help you through this situation. And at that moment, I realized it's probably what I shouldn't have done, right? And so, I'm trying to help the guy. He literally, it's a shit show, right? No pun intended.
Literally.
He's suspended, right. His suspender has fell into the toilet, right? And so I'm sitting here with this biohazard spray, trying to spray crap off the guy's back. I'm trying to get it off his clothes. I didn't went through a half a box of gloves. And I'm thinking to myself, like, what have I gotten myself into? Like, I have a degree, and I'm sitting in here wiping this older gentleman's butt for him. But at the end of the day, Brandon and Sarah, it's. I think at that moment I realized this is what I'm going to do. This is what my life is going to be with, management in restaurants. But at the end of the day, it was, the daughter came. Thank God, the 2 or 3 daughters came to the door, and they was like, hey, is everything okay? And I'm like, yeah, well, your dad's got a lot going on in here. I said, I'll tell you what, let me take the gloves. I took the gloves off. I said, I'm going to close it down. I said, you guys are welcome to come in. Let's get him squared away. Because what we didn't want is him to obviously walk through the restaurant with, everything that was going on. So it was a very interesting night, to tell the least. But man, I tell you what, I think at that moment I realized this was for me.
This is why you and I are very different, because I would have been like, this is not for me. I am not brave enough to do this, right? Even once, much less, perhaps in the future, right? So I guess it takes a certain amount of fortitude on a bunch of levels to be a GM. I think that's what we've definitely learned today. And obviously amazing leadership skills. I mean, both of you guys, right? Like just being able to keep that sort of stoic distance while also being, really human centered and people focused, and making sure that people know that, that you're an approachable leader. All those things that I think Brandon talked about, they're so important to your management style, and I think really speak to you as a person.
I actually have to
no worries.
Get on to work. So
no worries.
I appreciate the invite, guys, and maybe we can do it again.
Yeah, for sure. So thanks, Brandon, so much. Awesome. Really, really appreciate it.
Appreciate y'all. Thanks.
Thanks, Brandon.
Thank you so much for listening. And now for the shameless plug. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider buying us a $5 round or becoming a monthly supporter by visiting turnburn.co, selecting support, and clicking the Buy Us a Beer button.
Please also stay tuned for podcast updates by subscribing to our newsletter at turnburn.co, and follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Turn Burn Show. Thanks again for joining us, and stay out of the weeds.